right, welcome back to Hyperdrive Minds podcast. Today we've got Dr. Cecilia Jones. I'm excited to have you. How are you doing today?
I am doing quite well. It's getting summer, so it's the weather's nicer and all the things. The semester's over and we're moving forward, so it's all good.
Nice. And you're in New York, right?
Yes.
Downtown?
I am in New York, so I live in Manhattan, but I work and visit all the boroughs.
Awesome. Yeah, I haven't been up there in a couple of years, but I do love to visit. We need to take our kids. They're still a little bit too young to trust them, kind of run around, but
Mm.
we'll get up there one day soon. But yeah, Cecilia, tell us, who are you?
Yes, I would describe myself as a qualquant researcher who's obsessed about telling stories about people using data. And so that's been my whole entire career. It's why I do everything. And I'm also the founder and chief data scientist for Three Standard Deviations, where I help organizations figure out how to do this AI thing and what that means for them.
Companies need that right now. That's awesome. I love the company name. I think that's pretty clever in the statistics world, right?
Yes,
And I think you also teach, is that right?
I have taught, yes.
Okay.
So I have taught at several business schools. The topics I tend to focus on are related to marketing, marketing measurement, and more recently, AI ethics. So I firmly believe that technologies can be utilized to enhance our living experience, but they can also be utilized to harm our experience. So I teach, I write, I talk a lot about that.
I do too, as a recruiter. It's impacting employment right now, I feel like, and a recruiter's job. So, yeah, we should have a lot to chat about. Beyond just statistics and AI work that you do. I guess what is the company mission there for Three Standard Deviations?
It really started as a funny story, meaning many, many moons ago, I would have friends that would ask me questions like, oh, can you look at this operating model? Can you look at this analysis? Can you help me with this and that with their small, medium sized businesses? And I would always answer because I would be curious and I would be like, okay, I don't know the answer to that, but what would an answer look like? What would we need to pull together? What resources do we need to create something? And so I got very curious. And one day, one of them had said, I actually have resources. I have a budget now to help solve this problem. And I said, oh my goodness, this is such good news. You can stop paying me in beer. And that is how this organization was born. The name actually refers to, yes, it's a little bit of a statistics pun, but also it is my philosophy on life, meaning I firmly believe that it really only takes one yes to change the trajectory of your life. You just never know which yes. And by definition, those kinds of conversations never happen at the mean, at the center, at the average. It always happens at the third standard deviation. And by definition, it's rare. So you just have
Oh,
to
yeah.
keep exploring and being open to new ideas.
That's right. That's right. Same way I find my podcast guest. I'm like, wow, you seem very rare. I
Yeah,
want to talk to you.
yeah, yeah.
So I think we got connected through, I think I was sending you an NPC campaign or something like that. Or
Sure.
maybe I think I sent you a candidate and you're like, actually, if you see any roles, like, let me know. I'm open to
Yeah.
some consulting gigs. And then we got to chatting for like 45 minutes, I think, about,
Yeah.
what's going on in data science and AI. And
Uh-huh.
I think one of the things you were telling me is one of the challenges that you have whenever you start a conversation with a new potential client, you get to the end and discover that what all they really need is like a BI analyst and not so much like a full blown AI data scientist and everything you can bring to the table. So how
Yeah.
often do you encounter that?
How often do I encounter a misalignment of
Right.
business and maybe strategic objectives versus the resources that they're asking for? I would say, um, well, I'm a statistician, so saying anything that's 100%, that's not in my blood. Uh, asymptotically close to 100% of the time.
Oh,
I would
wow. Okay.
argue the majority of the time. There's always a misalignment between needs of the organization and the objectives, the strategic objectives, and the technology solutions, the talent solutions that they're trying to deploy against those types of problems. So it could be completely a mismatch in terms of the scope is too small for the kind of talent and for the resources they're looking for. So they're overpowering the solution. Or it could be the other way around, where there's not enough empowerment, there's not enough resources, and so they're underpowering the solution. It's a dynamic ecosystem to try to solve business problems. And that's why it's complex. And because it's complex, I see why the misalignment happens all the time. And I think that's where business leaders need to utilize their subject matter experts to help them to align the business objectives with the resources they need. So, yes, we can do the job, but we also can help strategize what is the appropriate solution to reach the objectives of the business strategy.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I'm in those conversations a lot as well as a recruiting partner. I always like to ask, why is this role open? Why'd you choose to title it this way? Like, what's the business need? So I wish companies would bring me in a lot sooner in the conversation rather than once they've already defined everything. And it's like, well, let's take a couple steps back here. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe you actually need something else. So you bridge marketing,
Mhm.
psychology,
Yeah.
statistics. How do these diverse fields like uniquely inform your approach to data science?
So I'm always going to be people first, meaning something I tell my students and mentees and other folks in the ecosystem quite often is that people are not ones and zeros. And if we forget to recognize the abstraction of data signals of ones and zeros are not people, we can fall into mistakes and assumptions that may help us get to an end of a project, sure, but the impact that we want to create by having these tools and technologies in place, that might be limited when we don't involve people first or we don't keep people at the center of these types of projects. The reason why I think all of these disciplines are actually quite connected, they're all different flavors or different instruments, maybe in an orchestra of trying to tell stories about people. On the statistics side, there's nothing deterministic really about human behavior. The only certainty we have at the moment is death and taxes. So because there's always going to be that error term, that je ne sais quoi, that something that we do not know, that unexpected surprise. I find because of that, statistics is a great way to model a lot of the behaviors that I'm trying to understand about people. Psychology, well, we are beings that are embodied. So we do have a physicality, but we have cognition, we have understanding. And very importantly, and maybe that's the distinction between us and machines at the moment, is there's an emotionality to our experience. It helps to color the way we perceive the world and helps us to navigate and make decisions of how we engage with our environment. And then from a marketing perspective, I am a consumer, just like everyone else. So, which brands I choose, which products I end up buying, which categories I'm engaged in, that affects my lived experience, my quality of life. And so, I've always been very interested in how these disciplines kind of shape how I see the world, how I interact with the world, how I create value, how I help others in the world. So I find it all very related about telling stories about people, but I can see the argument as well that others might find them to be quite disparate disciplines.
Yeah, I like that. People are not ones and zeros. Yeah, what motivates human behavior is strange. Like we're strange animals, I think. Like we're not motivated by anything logical, right? It's all about like status and our emotions. So, yeah, I bet you find some interesting insights there. And telling stories with data, that's a really interesting thing that you're able to do, right? And whenever you run your data science and discover something unique that the business can take action on, right? So I bet you come across all kinds of interesting insights for companies. Can you tell us about some of the most recent insights that you found interesting?
It's all related to the consumer experience. So this one's a little bit dated at this point, but many, many moons ago, there was an analysis that was done, and we were looking at consumption of hair color products. And so here in the US, typically it comes in a box, especially if you're not buying through a salon. There's typically one bottle inside and it's meant for one use. And then there's obviously, it fades over time, and then there's replenishment experiences for the consumer. However, there were pockets where there was just really high consumption of the product. It was just moving off the shelf. And then there were other areas where it looked very normal. And so at the time, the intuition was, oh, okay, well, obviously something about the advertising is doing well, or something about our competitive set, we're winning in those specific geographies, those specific markets. And the data was suggesting, okay, well, we see these oddities. It looks like an anomaly, but we double checked. Everything seemed to be true. And frankly, it's good sales, and therefore everyone's happy. Okay, the end. But I got curious because, well, why is that? We don't actually know why. We know what happened, and data sciences and statistics is very good at helping to describe what happened. But the why, that was what I was more interested in. And so it's a very long way. The story ends with, well, there had to be some qualitative research. And what was realized was that there were certain markets where the average length of hair was actually longer than the national average or for other markets. So, for these individuals who were purchasing hair color, they had to get two boxes because their hair was too long. And so that information was not in the original data set. You wouldn't necessarily think to collect that type of data. How do you collect that type of data? And so, from a data sciences perspective, yes, we could quantitatively analyze what was happening with the sales, and everyone could be very happy that sales are going up. However, understanding the consumer experience, understanding their why, we had to use other tools in our toolkit. And so I started off by saying, I'm a qualquant researcher. I am a firm believer that you have to have multiple tools in your toolkit as a researcher, as an analyst, to be able to better understand the story. And so through qualitative, oh, okay, we learned there's a lot of people in that region that have really long hair. And so they have to buy two boxes as opposed to buying one. So that was like an aha moment that wouldn't have come if we only had utilized quantitative methods and had we only utilized the data that was readily available. By being more curious, by being clever, by trying to stay focused on the consumer experience, that's when we learned a true insight. And then there are obvious business strategies. How do you maintain the consumption at two boxes, et cetera, et cetera? And that goes into more of the marketing strategy. But the initial insight was because we got curious about the consumer experience. So this, I tell students and clients and mentees all the time that yes, we can definitely machine learn, deep learn, we can AI a lot of this. Sure. There is an element of the consumer experience, the human experience, we don't write down in ones and zeros yet. And because of that, we have to utilize other methods. Like, for example, by talking to each other.
Right. Yeah. What are some of your favorite AI tools just outside of the chat GPTs and Geminis of the world?
This is the reason why I'm pausing is that I tend not to try to endorse. And the reason why I say that is this space is so aggressive and so dynamic at the moment that just one new PR release and one new update to a particular model could change the horse race. And so I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking, oh, there's only one solution, we're good. Most likely, at least in the near term future, most of us will have to use multiple AIs. And I would argue that's actually a good thing, right? So for those of us who are listening or who've been hanging out in the AI space for a while, or people who use ChatGPT, Gemini, any of them have noticed is, oh goodness, the machines hallucinate a lot. Sometimes they fabricate, and maybe that's more a suitable way to describe what's happening. They fabricate plausible outcomes, plausible outputs. And so, where I caution, especially individuals who are very excited about utilizing LLMs, yes, utilize them, but also recognize that the machines don't yet have a good understanding of when they are creating a confabulation or hallucination, sometimes called, as opposed to actually double checking the truth. So it is a common best practice to have the different AI platforms actually double check each other. And so you could have a workflow where an output from one AI is double checked by another one. So in that kind of way, you could kind of create an adversarial workflow to double check what's going
Mm-hmm.
on. I'll be a little bit more pragmatic. I get excited, especially for those of us who are inventors and entrepreneurs. So I run across a lot of leaders that, oh, I have a really good idea. If only I could develop this platform, this could help solve so many problems for this type of people or this niche opportunity. Or I see arbitrage in the ecosystem. I could totally take advantage of that and create value in a different way, but I'm not a software engineer. This is going to take a very long time for me to develop the MVP. And so, how am I going to get this done? And, I have a day job or I have other responsibilities. How do I get this done? What is so impressive about some of the newer technologies that are more public facing and in the marketplace, Cursor, Lovable, these low code, no code solutions that you still have to practice critical thinking and design thinking. However, if you have a brilliant idea for a business and you just need an MVP, so okay, maybe you don't need a full stack engineer because you're not thinking about scaling it yet, but you just want to see, can this idea, can it actually come to life? You could utilize those tools to do things yourself. So to prototype by yourself, this is so exciting because how often does a good idea not come to life because the level of effort to actually get a digital idea or a virtual idea into an MVP product, too much effort. And so I get very excited about these things. And I've seen cases where subject matter experts, individuals who may not have formal computer science training or formal software engineering training, but are very curious and they love to solve problems in their own way, in their own domain space, actually create prototypes that could help them in their role, or they could turn it over to IT and try to build it into a real product inside of their organization. But the opportunity to be able to solve virtual and digital problems, that's exciting. And that, I think that part sometimes gets lost in the mainstream conversations around AI. That democratization of the opportunity, I think, is a really exciting thing. And tools like Cursor, Lovable, and like this could help a lot of people. And I would recommend if you have an idea, try it, see what you can build.
For sure. Yeah. I've tried Replit, Lovable. I like those. I've had a couple of ideas that I've tinkered with, but after a day or two, I'm like, I can't get this API to work, and I've hit a dead end, and now I actually really need a developer. So this is going to go nowhere without real engineers. So they're not quite there yet. I think they're really good at making like a nice looking UI with
Mm-hmm.
functioning buttons, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll get you like 60% there, but
Mm-hmm.
for the real like behind the scenes infrastructure,
Yeah, of
how
course.
the app functions, if it's
Yes.
secure, like you're not going to get there without
Yes.
some real development horsepower. And I found that out the hard way. And then I just got back from the Unreal Fest conference in Orlando, and they've added to Unreal Engine, they've
Yeah.
added an AI like coding expert
Okay.
into the engine. And I was talking with a guy at the booth, and I'm like, hey, I get this idea for a game, right? I want to build
Yeah.
like this capture the train game for my kids, because all they want to do whenever we're playing Fortnite is just
Yeah.
ride on the train, hang out on the train.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so can I just tell the AI like, hey, make the biggest map possible, 4 sections on the map. We want icy mountains over here, green grass over here, desert over here. Randomize the fourth spot, and then just go ahead and lay out a train that just randomly roams around the map. And
Yeah.
can I just tell the AI to generate that? And he's like, well, not quite. We're not quite there yet, because that's not how it works. Like you have to, actually lay out the train, then you got to
Yeah.
put the train on there, and it's not going to automatically follow the tracks. Like you have to hard code train to follow the tracks. I'm like, wait a minute, why is that so difficult? Like, we're not there yet where you can just speak your idea into existence and do it without developers. I think we're still at least a year or two away from that, sadly.
Agree. But the fact that you're trying, the fact that you're pushing your ideas to the boundaries of your own capabilities. We were talking earlier about the mismatch of the scope needed for certain roles or resources against the business objectives. That's an excellent way of understanding. Wait, for this project I'm trying to do, this is as far as my internal resources can do. I need to supplement externally with devs, and in your case, making a train game, which is a brilliant idea. But that provides so much clarity in terms of, okay, this is actually the scope of work that I really can't do internally and I have to find externally. And I think the homework for businesses and for hiring managers who need like these types of technical talent, you have to kind of try to push it yourself to the boundary of the edge of, okay, this is literally as far as we can get with our internal resources. We really do need to scope this part externally. And that radical clarity makes it so much easier to engage with individuals like yourself to find the appropriate talent. The external talent, they're going to have clarity in terms of, okay, they seem to know exactly what they need, and either I can do it or I can't do it. But there's radical clarity instead of ambiguity. And I think a lot of the challenge in the AI space, because it is a creative space, is that we could do a better job of being more clear about what we really need. And that could help everyone, both buy side, sell side, both in house, external, figure out like what's the actual appropriate resources. And I know I said I wouldn't necessarily align with any specific firm, but you inspired me regarding your train game. I'm a big fan, and they are very much at the beginning of their journey, but they continue to keep moving, which I am excited about. Lovelace Studio. And the reason why I'm very interested in them is that, exactly to your point, you're a parent, you're trying to create an experience for your children that resonates with them. You have a brilliant idea. Oh, why can't you just speak it into existence? There are organizations like Lovelace Studio that is attempting to solve problems like this. And so there are people who are trying to build tools to help others to create the virtual environments that they want to be in. And I think in terms of spatial AI or virtual environments, this is an area where we definitely need more creators. So unlike
Oh yeah.
text, right? We have the whole internet for text for sure, and that has its ups and downs and pros and cons. And when it comes to virtual environments or simulations, we're still limited. We don't actually have that many environments. We don't have a diversity yet of different kinds of simulations and virtual environments. And so that's an area where there's a lot of opportunity to create.
Big time. Yeah, yeah. Every company's gonna have to create their own little metaverse, right? Websites aren't that cool anymore. You need a metaverse that people can go to and hang out. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see. We'll see. I would say maybe that's a little bit further away. What I recommend, and I've spoken about publicly, is that I think every organization, the interface in which consumers will interact with brands and products very soon in virtual environments is going to be some form of a chatbot, some form of an AI agent. And so brands and organizations need to be quite mindful of, well, what is the personality of this chatbot or AI agent? Or what are we going to allow in terms of scope for this interaction? So the challenge with chatbots and with AI agents is that the inputs, so what the user or what the consumer types in or what they say to the chatbot is unbounded. They could say whatever they want. However, if you're the firm in business and you're receiving this information, oh goodness, what do we do if someone shares information that we don't want to hold on to because there's maybe legal liability? So let's say a child is speaking to a chatbot because it's in a game and they start mentioning their name, their address, other forms of PII that maybe is particularly sensitive, or healthcare information where we do have regulation here in the US. If I'm a firm that isn't in that sector, I don't want to hold on to this information. As a chief data officer, goodness, this is not good for us. We don't want to hold on to this. How do we respond to this? What do we do with this information? How do we delete it? And if you're a multinational, obviously there's GDPR, obviously there's the EU AI Act. And that's the case of just a user sharing. Let's say a user needs help and the consumer is inputting something that, oh gosh, they may need emergency services. And for whatever reason, they're expressing it to a chatbot as opposed to calling the appropriate resources for help. Okay, I'm a firm. I was not expecting anyone to have these kinds of potential emergencies. Ooh, I don't want to deal with this liability. Okay, what regulations or what constraints should I put into this chatbot or this AI agent so I can actually route the individual to the right resources to help them? This is very not regulated yet. We do not have standards yet. And because of that, organizations are having to make choices about how to design these systems. And I always advocate, and this is where I applaud all the work by AI ethicists that are in the field and designers who have AI ethics in mind to keep thinking about, okay, how do I address accessibility? How do I address these kind of use cases where we could be helping someone or we could inadvertently be harming someone. Because there is no regulation, I am pragmatic. At least in this market for the near future, I do not have a crystal ball. If I did, I would be doing different things. However, I am a statistician, so I do like making predictions and I like betting. I would say most likely there will not be necessarily regulations around AI chatbots and agents in the near term future. And so firms are on their own. The ecosystem is on their own to self regulate and ensure that we minimize potential harms while we also are able to capitalize on the potential benefits of utilizing these kinds of tools with our consumers. So, near term, AI agents and chatbots, but we got to think about it with people at the center.
Yeah, interesting. Companies could get themselves in a lot of trouble by offering medical advice or something that, the bot just went rogue and, recommended something that actually ended up harming someone.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's a interesting challenge there. I don't know the solution. Maybe you just need bots with a very limited scope. And then, hey, it sounds like you
Mhm.
need attention outside of this scope. Here, talk to our other bot or
Mhm.
maybe place an ad for, it sounds like you need better help. Here, go to betterhelp.com or whatever.
Mhm.
So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, in the age of AI, you've talked about the idea of trust and there's some misconceptions there. So what do you think? What's your advice on, building trust in these digital interactions?
So I find it interesting because technology mediates our communication. So, for example, right now, we're utilizing technology to help us have this conversation. We're not physically in the same room, we're not recording in the same studio, and we're in different locations, and technology is helping us to close the gap. So there are certain signals that we would normally have if we were in person that we don't have here. So, for example, I don't have all of the physicality that I normally would be able to utilize to emote or to express my emotions. So, the way I gesture with my hands, the gesticulations will be closer to my face because if I do it too far away, you don't see it. And so that adjusts the verbal and nonverbal vocabulary that we use to build relationships. And something that I think about quite often is when we choose to be online or virtual, when we choose to be hybrid. So, how many of us actually have relationships that are 100% physical, only in real life? Very few. Even if we're in a household with a significant other or a partner, most likely you communicate with your mobile phone. Or if you have children of a certain age and your household has made choices, maybe after school, that's how you figure out who gets home and all the things. And so, even what we would consider our most intimate relationships, technology is still helping us manage those relationships. So, our relationships are hybrid. And in a commercial setting, a lot of our relationships are hybrid because we have clients, we have suppliers, we have all sorts of stakeholders in the ecosystem not co located. So we have hybrid situations, and in many situations, fully virtual. And so the vocabulary we use, maybe we don't utilize colloquialisms or idioms that are very specific to our region or where we're from, because maybe it's not understood to colleagues in another market. The way we say hello when we begin a conversation may change because, wait, what time zone are they in? Is it really good morning, good afternoon, good evening? Maybe we just all say aloha, and that's a good way to go too.
I like that.
But again, we make choices about how we decide to communicate. When we make choice to be in person, this is a very important meeting. We are signing the contracts between our organizations, and so we are choosing to be co-located in the same building in the same city for this specific event. It becomes very special, just like a wedding in some ways. We're starting to create value statements about when we choose to be in person, and so that complicates our relationships in the sense that, oh, that professional colleague, okay, I pretty much only see them virtually. And if they're in town, sure, maybe get a beverage or a coffee or something, but most likely. Okay. Does that signal something about the relationship and how much you trust that person, or maybe don't trust that person, or nothing at all? This is all values, beliefs, and norms about how we relate to each other in hybrid and virtual environments that isn't solidified. We are literally figuring it out. I have a good amount of individuals in my life that are still trying to figure out the dating scene and the whole idea of ghosting and cookie crumbing and all the words that I don't know. These are all new behaviors and norms that we're figuring out as these technologies are helping us to manage our relationships, both personally and professionally. And so a lot of the work I do is trying to figure out what are some of these newer signals and how do we utilize some of these newer signals to reinforce and grow relationships. And if there is a choice to disengage, how to wind down a relationship. And so this is all very new space, new signals, new behaviors, new norms. And so it's quite exciting, but again, it's developing. So is there the book, all the answers? No. And I wouldn't want to be in a space like that because it wouldn't be as fun. I like
Right.
discovering things. I get curious.
Yeah, I just want anything generated by AI, or if it is a chat bot, I want it to like be earmarked. This is AI. This is not a real person.
Yes.
You know, if you're chatting with an AI bot, like, hey, I'm an AI bot from so and so. Now you're talking to a bot. I think it's kind of the wrong path to kind of leave that optional. It should be, I don't know, maybe there'll be a law for it at some point, but it's not yet, right? To label and be, upfront when you're talking to an AI.
Yeah.
And now companies are having to filter through AI resumes and fake AI generated video interview avatars and things like that. So, yeah, it's a strange landscape every company is having to navigate right now. So, yeah, that's a big part of building trust, is just being upfront about what is AI, what isn't, you know.
And then we don't have agreed upon definitions. So, for example, if there was a conversation and I have an earpiece that is telling me what to say, and maybe
Oh,
I choose
yeah.
not to say everything, but maybe I say most of it. Is that AI? I'm augmented for sure. I have something helping me, a machine helping me in the conversation. Is that okay? We
Mm.
don't have norms around that yet. So we don't
I
know.
don't know. Who's a college student that I think they got kicked out of school, but they made like these AI glasses that, especially if you're going on dates, like it would look at the person in front of you and you'd have access to all their social media and their profiles and everything and be able to ask them questions. Maybe 2 months ago, you see they went on a trip. So that sparks the question that you had about, hey, how was your trip? You know, things that you wouldn't know because you've got this AR, augmented reality information.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think if you are dating, somebody comes to the date with like the glasses that you can tell, or the AI glasses from Meta or something like that, you're probably gonna say, "Hey, why don't you take those off?" let's just talk, just me and you here.
Yeah.
I don't need anybody else in the room. I don't know if you're filming. Like, yeah, let's just take those off.
I mean, I love that example because we don't have social norms around that. So if somebody is wearing technology like that and they're utilizing it to facilitate the conversation, okay. I mean, some people might say that's unsavory. Some people might say, oh, that's perfectly fine. Let's take it from a therapeutic case. So this is where I get excited about healthcare tech. How about if there was an individual that struggled to understand other people's emotions? Maybe they have a diagnosis of something, or maybe they don't, or maybe they just naturally just struggle. And so, what if those same AR glasses were able to say, oh, the person is leaning in. They seem interested in what you're saying. Or oh, the furrow in the brow is indicating, ooh, they may not have liked what you said. They may be angry. You might want to explore that. And so giving additional support in terms of trying to understand another person's emotions, especially if this is an area that may be of difficulty, could that be a therapy to help others to better interact with each other? So maybe less creepy and maybe more of a therapeutic use case. These are the gray area fine lines where technologies can be quite helpful for individuals, but then also create challenges in terms of what are new social norms. And going back to the earlier part of the conversation, we don't have all the answers yet. This is
Right.
all completely new spaces. And the only thing I ask of everyone, myself included, is as long as we recognize that, yeah, we're going to make a lot of mistakes in this space because we're going to learn into it because nobody has all the answers. If someone says they do, I would be very curious to understand their credibility on that topic. But I think one thing we can all do, regardless of our level of engagement with technology, our level of knowledge when it comes to technology, is oh, I think we can practice extending each other the grace of dignity. And so, as long as that part we can kind of agree on, then if you're a person, maybe you should have dignity and maybe we should treat each other with dignity, regardless of the changes, regardless of different ideologies, regardless of all the exogenous factors that can make life interesting and up and down and all the wonderful things. We'll figure it out. I'm
We
hopeful
will.
that way.
Yeah, I didn't have a ton of time to do research before this interview, so I did cheat a little bit. I got Gemini to research you and help me come up with some questions.
That's
So,
okay.
but
I have a
I was
digital
up front.
footprint.
I told you
Yeah,
before.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So it's good at helping with that for sure. So you've said in the past that measurement for measurement's sake is kind of a common trap. So how do you ensure that a company's data initiatives kind of deliver real business results as opposed to just measuring things they think are going to have an impact but won't?
So, a framework I love to utilize, and it's a relatively old framework. Again, I'm very much about consumer at the center, customer at the center, and people at the center. I'm always curious this strategy, this objective, this goal that we have as a business. What do you want your customers to see, think, and do? Feel and do. So, if you can answer those things, I haven't used any technical words. We can write it down in sentences. I typically go through that exercise with stakeholders to better understand okay, this is what you want them to experience. This is what you want them to understand. This is how you want them to feel. This is what you want them to do. From there, that's when we decide okay, do we have a direct means of measuring those things or indirect means? Most likely indirect. Okay, of those indirect means, how many of those things, if it were to change, if we had a number, if we had a calculation, if that were to change, you would change your behavior in terms of a business strategy. Okay, the majority of those things, you would not change the behavior. You would still keep going with the same thing you're doing. And I would say, okay, we are only interested in either direct measurements. And if there are indirect measurements, are any of these things going to change what you're going to do as a business if the number changes? If the answer is no, then I would say, okay, this falls into the measurement because you can measure sake, which is fine. You can do that for sure. But that also takes resources. And so when we think about organizations that have all sorts of trade off choices they have to make, I would encourage them to stay focused on the measurements where they are willing to take a different action as a result if the number changes.
Yeah, I think recruiting companies do that a lot. They're measuring all kinds of KPIs for their recruiters and salespeople, and how many meetings, how many first business meetings, was it a breakfast? Did you drop off food? And there's like all these different ways you can categorize your meeting notes that would end up on a report for the corporate office to kind of measure. And I'm like, this is too much. Like, you're measuring too many things. Like, you should really just simplify it down, make it easy. Like, measure just 3 things
Mhm.
because it's getting out of hand. But companies just keep adding them, right? They want to get more and more granular because they're trying to figure out which KPI, which action has the most impact on production. It's like those haven't changed in forever. Submittals, interviews, contracts signed, deals, revenue. What are some of the main KPIs that you like to measure? I know this probably depends on what you're looking at, but I don't know, which area do you find most interesting to measure?
So, yes, first of all, yes, you're correct. It always depends on the context. But what I do recommend when organizations are trying to figure out, well, what should I be measuring? I don't recommend ever looking at counts in isolation. I'm always interested in ratios. Why am I interested in ratios? Because there is a numerator and there's a denominator. The thing that we count, which is typically in the numerator, the number on top, has to be put in context. I have 1,000 something somethings. Okay. We just counted to 1,000. Great. Fantastic. Did that move the business? 1,000 something somethings? I don't know. However, if you had a denominator which gives it context, okay, that 1,000 over, I don't know, 10,000. Oh, that's a ratio now. Now we have an understanding of what's the meaning of that number. And so whenever I'm consulting organizations or teams in terms of, okay, we got to figure out some KPIs. I agree. Yes, you cannot change what you cannot measure. However, counting things, I do not recommend. I always recommend, and there has to be a ratio. There has to be context. And that context, quantitatively, we can easily express through ratios, through percentages. And so I would argue anytime that you're in a conversations and someone just throws out any number, big number, small number, I just always nod and say, oh, that's lovely. That's a number. I don't know what it means. Am I supposed to feel happy about that or sad about that? Angry about that? I don't know. Help me
Yeah,
understand the
compared to
context.
what?
Yes, exactly. The compared to what? That's what is typically contained in the denominator. So the bottom number of the ratio. So the context matters. That typically is my advice when it comes to, okay, we need to measure something. Let's figure it out. What's most meaningful?
Yeah, very true. What is a strategic moat?
So, um, understanding that every firm has competitors in the ecosystem. A moat, if we imagine, okay, where would we get this idea? If we imagine many, many, many moons ago when there were castles and those castles had to be defended, one strategy was to dig up a whole bunch of ground around the castle and fill it with water, and it would create a physical barrier to people who want to invade or people who wanted to take over the castle. And so a strategic moat, I make a difference between a strategic moat as opposed to any moat, is that a strategic moat is meant to give you longer term advantage. So chasing shiny objects, maybe you get some first mover advantage and maybe that creates a little bit of an innovation mode and you get some buzz and maybe some new customers from it. And it can help you in the short run. However, if your firm is not able to grow it or your firm is not able to address the risk when you're a first mover, and there are consequences, well, was it really an advantage in the longer run? Maybe not. Maybe you're not a first mover. Maybe your firm is actually a fast follower. That's okay too. That's a choice. But being clear about when you're adopting technologies and what role you want it to play in terms of your strategy, I think is important. And so creating moats, yes, that helps to protect your firm to make sure you hold on to position. But again, I caution against always chasing against the shiniest thing. Maybe you don't have the first mover. And again, that's always highly contextual. It always depends. the firm, the category, the time of year, the sector you're in, the amount of regulation, all sorts of factors that go into deciding what's best for your organization.
Interesting. What industries do you spend the most time consulting in?
That is a very good question. Because I'm really obsessed about customer and consumer, I tend to spend a good amount of time with fast moving consumer goods, luxury. However, I would say education is an area that I'm spending a good amount of time. Healthcare, mental health care tech, I'm spending a good amount of time. And then I also FSI, so financial services as well.
Okay. Yeah, mental health care tech and like the wearable technology for healthcare. Like, I really want that to advance quickly because I'm a user of Fitbit and I want to know, what's up with my data. I want an AI bot that I can just, hey, look at all my blood work for the past 13 years. Like, what's wrong with me? What do I need to do here? But I don't think there is really one yet that is trusted to do that. I don't know what kind of healthcare tech are you most excited about?
So we alluded to it in the earlier part of the conversation. I'm very excited about therapeutics, especially wearables as therapeutics. So we were talking about the augmented reality glasses that could be quite helpful for individuals who are struggling with interpersonal communications. I'm
Is that
also
for
very
like Asperger's and stuff like that, like helping folks that have trouble understanding the other person they're speaking with, their emotions, like try to give them some feedback that they might not notice?
maybe that is one of the diagnoses. I mean, there's a whole family. However, it
Okay.
may be an individual that doesn't have a diagnosis, but finds that, gosh, I struggle to relate to people or connect to people when I'm talking to them. This could still be therapeutic for them, even though they may not have a
Okay.
label for it. So I caution against the label one-to-one association with a label and a solution in the mental health care space. It's very complicated. I'm also not a psychiatrist, so I caution against those types of recommendations. I also get very excited about personalized medicine. So, what we do know is that everyone metabolizes things we ingest in different ways. Why? Our hormone levels are different. The humidity in the air is different. What you ate yesterday, your physical health. Maybe you went to the gym. Maybe you didn't go to the gym. Maybe you stayed up too late. All of these factors in our lived experience changes the way we metabolize what we ingest. So the way I metabolize food or the way I metabolize medicines. So imagine where we have technologies that can actually help to do appropriate levels of dosing for medicines based
Yeah,
on
that's a
how
big
you're
one.
metabolizing.
Yeah, because I practice fasting quite a bit. I do OMAD pretty much during the week. On the weekends, I just eat whatever. So yeah, I'm like an amateur biohacker. I'm trying to live forever, right? But the personalized medicine thing is going to be key, right? Everybody's going to have their own healthcare AI doctor bot, right? That's always looking at them and giving them recommendations for the day. Like, hey, you stayed up a little bit late last night. Why don't we go easy on the coffee and just start with electrolytes today, instead of your normal routine. So, yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I need that. And, another thing about folks' metabolism is all the health gurus, like the exercise gurus, talk about, if you're trying to lose weight, it's just calories in, calories out, right? Just you got to count your calories, right? Eat less food. It's not rocket surgery, but I think new science is discovering that your metabolism can swing like 40%,
Mm-hmm.
right? And from person to person, day to day. So it's not that simple. It's not just eat less. Like some people could eat a lot more and based on their behavior, right? So it needs to be fluid. Have you discovered that as well?
I played sports and I've been active in different periods of my life. So, yes, personal observation. I'm not a registered dietitian, so I can't really speak to direct advice regarding nutrition and how to manage metabolism. But I can imagine, as someone who's more in the technology data AI space, well, having machines to help us figure out or help us monitor what makes sense for us as individuals, not at scale, not one size fits all, could be quite helpful. I think the tension that we feel with these more recent technologies is that we always talk about scale, big numbers, everyone, how many users do you have? And yes, having many users unlocks network effects, and there's all these benefits. And yes, because we are in a capitalist society, growth means bigger numbers. That's part of it. But on the other hand, we have this other side, this tension with personalization. So, what works for you definitely may not work for me. What works for me yesterday may not work for me today. And so, to your exact point, having our machines be personalized and understanding the dynamic nature of the lived experience on a day to day, that's very individualized. That's n equals one, not many people. And so you see this tension all the time. Oh, you want to scale with big numbers, but we also want to make sure that you have your personalized, individualized experience. And so navigating the trade offs regarding what do we make more ubiquitous, more standard, versus what do we allow for more personalization, more individualization. That's, again, product people, designers. These are all challenges and questions that technology firms and people who are building technologies have to answer. And again, I always go back to the same thing. What is the user experience? What is the consumer experience? What do we want them to think, see, feel, and do? And so keeping their experience at the center, keeping their needs at the center, I argue, is what's important when we're trying to develop technology.
For sure. Yeah. And it's not just the healthcare companies trying to do that. It's actually some of the gaming companies that I met at Unreal Fest. I mean, they're working on that too, like personalized coaches for healthcare, whatever your use case is. I think a lot of different companies are working on that, not just healthcare. But yeah, so you teach at a top business school or top business schools.
Yes.
What's one skill that you emphasize most for like the next generation of data scientists and data engineers?
I do teach this in workshop, and I have spoken about this publicly as well. So I am a firm believer that if you want to be a technologist, the durable skills that you need to be successful, it's not programming languages, unfortunately. It's not knowing which is the latest tech platform, unfortunately, because those things change. I argue for durable skills. What are they? Critical thinking. We alluded to it earlier in the conversation. What happens when you don't know if someone's resume is real? How do you know? What do we do if the interview is with an avatar and you're not really certain, is that AI or not AI? You have to be able to put your critical thinking cap on. Creativity. The machines are very good at replicating and synthesizing. So it's very good at that kind of compression type of activities. But the brilliant idea that changes the world is still happening from people. So creativity is still a critical skill. And if your creativity is expressed through paint, if your creativity is expressed through words, if your creativity is expressed through maths, it's all good. But creativity matters, how you express it yourself. Collaboration. None of us are islands. We are gregarious creatures. We survive better amongst others. And so being able to collaborate with others, both people and machines, is going to be key. And then communication. So by definition, language is imprecise. And so being able to effectively share ideas, either with other people or with machines, and in figuring out what's the best way to exchange information such that the recipient understands that communication skills it's going to be still very critical. So I call it the 4 C's. So critical thinking,
Interesting.
creativity, collaboration, and communication. All durable skills.
Do you think those can be learned, or do people just either have those or not?
I am hopeful for every single person. Are you born with maybe a base set of levels of those things? Maybe, maybe not. That is not my discipline, so I can't speak to those things. However, do I think people can learn? Yes, I'm a firm believer people can learn. Why? Our brains are plastic. All the things I've ever done in my life, my grandmother would never have imagined it. So if I was only in a fixed state of what my grandparents lived through and the experiences they had, well, I wouldn't be doing any of this. How many of us are doing jobs that maybe may not have existed 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or maybe they had those titles in those kinds of jobs, but the day-to-day tasks you do looks very different than the person with the same job and same title did 30 years ago. So I am a firm believer, and this is part of our superpower, our ability to learn, our ability to be curious. And those are the things that I think we need to nurture, regardless of the changes of technology.
So if we take those four things, I guess, what do you predict will be the most AI-proof jobs in the future?
I do not have a crystal ball, so uh,
Me neither.
I don't know.
Plumbers.
You might have AI systems redesign plumbing systems. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, humanoid robot plumbers.
I do actually give advice in terms of like career development, especially for individuals who are beginning to think about those things. I always tell them, yes, having the name of an occupation is great. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a teacher. Yes, if that is your passion, go for it. And I'm actually applauding you for your radical clarity that this is what you want to do. If you don't, which is the majority, myself included, I would say, what matters to you most in terms of how you want to feel? I want to help people. Okay, you can help people in many ways. It could mean you work for a nonprofit. It could mean you have different sectors in an HR function. Um, Maybe you do decide to become a therapist or a doctor because that's the way you want to help people. And so being more concerned about how you want to create an impact, what kinds of impacts you want to create, the how part that could change as a result of everything that's happening in the environment and time. Your interests can change over time as well. Most of us will have second and third careers. And so as a result of that, being clear about your values and what's your North Star and how you want to interact with your environment and how you want to interact with other people, I think is a good exercise to go through so you can have clarity for yourself.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Yeah, follow Daniel Miessler. He's got a newsletter and a podcast called Unsupervised Learning, and that's what he says. It's super important to not just pick what your job role is, but like you have to decide, here is the problem that I see in the world that I'm trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the three things that I'm trying to do about it, and here's how we're measuring our impact. So try to get that down before anything else. And none of that mentions a job title.
Mm-hmm.
You can wear many hats,
Mm-hmm.
but get clarity on that, which is very hard to do.
Yes, I would consider that deep work. So that
Big
means
time.
we can't be too distracted by what's happening around us at all times that are trying to take our attention so we can do that deep work. So granting yourself the space to actually think about those things. And it can change over time. That's okay too.
Right.
But granting yourself the space because you deserve it to know what's true for you.
Very cool. Well, do you have any questions for me, Cecilia?
I am so curious. What is the one question that you wish guests would answer that most of the time they don't?
Well, the AI stuff, I'm so worried about employment, right? Are we going to fall into Great Depression again just from the amount of jobs that AI is going to take? I think people are not willing to accept that it may have such a negative impact. There's some people trying to warn, but I also hear, yeah, AI is going to create a lot of jobs as well. I just don't know what those jobs will be.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to start paying each other for every unit of time that we spend? And will there be a bidding system out there where, hey, if you want to get 5 minutes with Cecilia, her rate is actually due to the volume of people who want to spend time with her.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cost 60 units to book a meeting with her, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and then the more popular and powerful and influential you are, that number just goes up. And it's all based on like everybody becomes their own eBay, where you're bidding money for this person's times. I don't know. Like, you going to be able to pay people to go on a walk with you or just call you on the phone? How are we going to make a living? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I find that folks want to dance around that and not be candid about it, about the true fear and the true challenge we're going to face with that.
Okay, fair. I think my response to that is change is coming. That is regardless of the technology. We don't know everything, and no one does. I'm willing to say that statement. I firmly believe we can all figure this out together, not in isolation. And then I would say, I alluded to it earlier, regardless of the changes that we know are coming, we have individual opportunity to practice making sure we treat each other with dignity. That's the one thing we can do.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, the government just needs to outlaw AI. Just cancel it. We need people. We need people to do these jobs. I don't
I
know.
don't know. I'm pro technology. I really am. I'm
Right,
pro
right.
technology. However, I am
Limited.
also pro people because our technologies we invented fire, right? Okay, that helped us to cook. We invented light bulbs. Okay, that helped us to see so we can work at night or do other things at night. Our technologies is what makes our quality of life the way it is. It is also our responsibility to manage those technologies. And that's the part where we could all use a little bit more help.
Big time. Absolutely. Well, you've been an awesome guest, Cecilia. I think we're running overtime a little bit. I want to be respectful here. Yeah, do you have anything you want to leave as a last thought with the audience?
Well, first of all, thank you for everyone who has listened because we did have a winding, twisty road in terms of the
We
conversation.
did.
And I am ever so curious what everyone does in terms of their individual roles when they choose to utilize technology. I'm excited to see what happens next.
All right. Where can people find you?
Good question. I am primarily on Substack. So I am the author of Authentic Interactions, which is a weekly Substack where I have a lot of interdisciplinary musings about how do we live when we have technology helping us to live our lives. And then I am also primarily on LinkedIn. So you'll see me posting quite a lot. So you can kind of see the kinds of multidisciplinary topics that I tend to talk about.
All right. LinkedIn, Substack. I'm on Substack. I'll have to follow you there. And, of course, or live on LinkedIn. Get with Cecilia if you need some data engineering, data science, how to gain insights from your data. What can you do with data? All the things, right?
All right. Brilliant. Thank
So,
you so much for
yeah,
your time.
likewise. Pleasure having you, Cecilia. Have a good rest of your Friday and have a good weekend.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.